So good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is David Walters and I am Head of Strategic Programs here at Altitude Angel. I'd like to welcome you all to the second in a series of industry focused webinars. We had a brilliant turnout and a reaction to our first webinar. Standards, a little less conversation, a little more action, please. If you missed that one, it is still available to watch on either our YouTube channel or altitudeangel.com. We gave the title of today's webinar, Above and Beyond the Role of UTM in Enabling BVLOS Flight. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to submit them in the comments section and I'll do my best to read them out and put them to the panel. We also had a number of questions submitted prior to today, so I will try my best to answer those as part of the discussion. So I would like to introduce today's webinar panel. Today we have our first guest speaker, CEO and founder of drone manufacturer Herotec, Edward Anastassacos. Edward has a stellar background in both UAV hardware and software. As well as founding Herotec, he wrote one of the first white papers on UTM when he worked at Connected Places Catapult. And only this week I found out that Edward had previously worked on the ExoMars rover Mars Yard. So Edward, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks very much. Excited to be here.
And of course, a man that needs no introduction, I'd like to welcome Altitude Angel's CEO and founder, and my boss, Richard Parker.
Hi there.
Welcome both. So before we dive into the conversation, industry has an aspiration for BVLOS. It is the most talked about thing in the drone industry. Countries around the world are amending their drone policies so they can allow drones to fly BVLOS for maximum efficiency. But why? The global BVLOS market revenue is currently estimated at 19 billion, with a projected market size of 34 billion by 2019. Europe itself is estimated to account for approximately 25% of that global drone market, with a projected BVLOS market worth 8.5 billion. So we've seen BVLOS flights operating successfully in Africa to deliver all medical supplies. So it's proving, so if it's proved technology and we can already fly BVLOS, what are we missing? So Richard, if I can go to you first, BVLOS means different things to different people. What does it mean to you?
That's a fab opener. So BVLOS, I think, is an interesting term. So for those that aren't familiar with the acronym, of course, we mean Beyond Visual Line of Sight, widely regarded as, quote unquote, the holy grail of drone flight. But I think when many people talk about BVLOS, what they actually mean is remote pilot. And I think that's one of the myths we'd like to dispel today is, when we talk about BVLOS, what we're actually pushing for here is automated flights at scale. And I think Ed's got a term which he uses, which is unsupervised flights. I think that's a great term that really captures what the market really needs in order to unleash the potential of drones to, do everything from humanitarian work to amazing industrial work and commercial work. So it's that breaking of the link between a human and the piloting. I think that's what we are hoping to achieve with BVLOS enablement.
And Edward, your thoughts to that question as well?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on by Richard. We see like almost two steps to this. Today, when you talk about BVLOS, you talk about flying far away, more than often. But there are other avenues for BVLOS flying, like behind buildings. I know that becomes like a consideration as well. But those are typically remotely piloted. Those are supervised. That is supervised flying. I think when you tap into the scalability side of the drone world, especially when you come into the play of multiple drones operated by one person or even unoperated, unsupervised by anybody, that's when you really tap into the market potential, and the scalability piece breaks in hugely. I think that is the real. That is the real holy grail of the drone industry, and that's what Herotec 8 is really born to do.
Fantastic. So, I mean, Edward, you were one of the first to write a paper on UTM whilst you were at Connected Places Catapult. So you're kind of sitting on the other side now. So what are your requirements from a UTM to enable organisations to conduct BVLOS flights from an automated drone-in-a-box solution that you provide?
That's a good question. So UTM, well, firstly, maybe let's start from the box solution perspective. When we give our system to a customer, what we don't want them to do is have to think about any of the deconfliction aspects. How do we manage the drone flights? What happens when something like an aircraft flies over? What are the fail safes there? We make the onus on the burden on the customer as minimal as possible. We're trying to automate and take that responsibility away from them. We're trying to reduce that level of complexity. UTM is a fantastic way to do that. And when we wrote the UTM white paper as part of Catapult, when I wrote it as part of Catapult, we brought in a whole bunch of industry experts, Altitude Angel included, of course, to figure out what the key requirements would be. From our side, we expect the customer to have to not think about it, and UTM to be that layer of automation that deconflicts for us. Now, as an industry, UTM is obviously much more complex. The customer just doesn't want to deal with it. The industry has to deal with it, and that's really what UTM is, in my eyes, there to do.
Fantastic. I mean, Richard, from your perspective, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree, actually, with everything Edward's saying. I'm going to have to try and find something to disagree with later, just so that we can have a really good discussion for our webinar guests. But generally speaking, I absolutely agree with that view that the goal here between in trying to achieve automated unsupervised BVLOS flight is transparency, right? The customer doesn't care about the art of flying. They don't care about how to get the drone into the airspace. What they want is the drone to go and do the job that they need the drone to do. And for everything to do with the logistics, getting airborne, safety while they are airborne, that needs to be completely invisible to them. That's just hopefully something that can be reduced down to a series of API interfaces, technical interfaces that can be integrated by manufacturers, by software developers into their products. So just as we sit here today and we click print and we can print a document without understanding how the printer works, you should be able to do the same with a drone. You should be able to dispatch a drone to a location, get the data from that job done, and the drone returns to its charging pad. So I think, yeah, absolutely, a UTM is a key enabler in that scenario.
Fantastic. And I think, amongst us all, we're all forward visionaries, as it might be, thinking about how innovation, etc., is going to develop. But the technology is here now, from the UTM, the drone-in-a-box solution. But we are also aware there are hurdles and challenges which we need to overcome. What do you see as being the critical ones? And I put this to kind of Ed first. Is it connectivity, regulation, standards?
So I think this is a challenge. So from a connectivity standpoint, even if we isolate everything within a local network, our customers are still looking for that kind of a solution. They don't even want the 4G enabled super connected system yet. That's coming, and we know that is coming. But the connectivity isn't really the bottleneck, I'd say. I'd say for Herotec 8, it boils down to the restrictions that we have. Often, particularly on a case-by-case basis, if we have to justify safety on a case-by-case basis, where we're often, I think there's sort of an overhead that we have to associate with each commercial opportunity that we have. We'd love to, of course, overcome these, and I think and I'm sure you'll talk about this in the upcoming segments around future flight and the CA sandbox and things like that. But what I think what we're required to do at the moment as an industry, perhaps as a whole, is to understand how to overcome those blockers. Can we is there even a prescriptive mechanism that we can employ in order to get our systems airborne and flying the way in which we envisage them to do? So from a technical standpoint, I think to a large degree, there's a lot there already, whether it's the automated charging, can we fly up to 2 kilometers to 10 kilometers and so on in the nearby areas? Technically, the answer is yes. We can do the landing, we can do the charging, we can even monitor our log files to determine whether or not there's sort of strange oscillations, and we can prepare the aircraft remotely for its next flight. The challenge is getting authorization to do so. That's where we are. Let's say we find ourselves in a difficult point, but this is the opportunity now.
Fantastic. And again, Richard, the same question to you.
Yeah, I think again, hitting the nail on the head, and I think it's worth just recognizing, right, that different countries have different tolerances for different levels of risk, and there are different ways and different means of pushing the bars out. But generally speaking, that quite vast procedural requirement that usually sits at the beginning of any BVLOS and potentially even any automated mission is going to be a blocker if we don't find a way to overcome that, and to do that with respect to the very real safety concerns that exist. I mean, again, technology is a key part of that. And for altitude angel, when we talk about the technology, we're really talking about the software that sits in the UTM and the communications technology that goes with it. But there are other aspects to that that also need to be considered around airframe, airworthiness, etc. If we're talking about removing humans from the loop, then of course there are lots of other challenges that are associated with that, and being able to offer that assurance that things can be done safely. So lots of different facets need to change, and they can change. I think it's just a case of continuous testing, continuously trying to push the bar and doing so in a safe way with a supportive regulatory framework.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree with all of that. Now, everyone has seen the press and the PR in the last 12 months. Obviously, Altitude Angel are participating in the CAA industry sandbox. Do we need to see more innovations and development around these type of concepts for empowering new technology and for allowing the CAA to come on that journey of development with innovators like ourselves and like Edward? What do you think is the best way for industry to approach this? I'll put that to Edward first.
Sure. I think like I think we're probably at a very interesting crossroad where I think we've arrived at this point today where, you know, it's been like it's like we've moved forward at 1,000 or 1,000,000 miles an hour, and now we've got to figure out which way to turn together as an industry with the regulator. So I think what we've got with all the innovation pieces and opportunities that are upcoming, things like the sandbox, things like future flight and the UTM programs that are in play today. It's about figuring out which, you know, through these programs, it's about figuring out which way to turn. I think the most important thing throughout all of this is really a interface. I think the term I used for when I was at the catapult was really to treat the catapults as that interface, to figure out what the issues are, what the challenges are, and then how do you overcome all of those challenges in the context of a framework. That's what I tried to, I guess, push forward whilst I was there. I think the catapults are doing in terms of innovation is to work with the regulators, work with the other innovators in the industry to figure out how to move ahead. Is there a prescription, let's say, a prescriptive approach that we can get to test, not even to employ, just to test? And if it doesn't work, or if it can be better, we get that feedback and then we re-innovate, I guess. I think that's the opportunity that we have with all of this, let's say, body of innovation, this program of innovation that we have today. I don't know if that made sense. May have waffled over that.
Yeah, I like that response, and I think you know, it's really interesting to consider where the different regulatory bodies are at the moment. So obviously, the sandbox is a great program that enables true innovation. But again, it's suffering a little bit from some of the challenges of trying to bolt innovation into a very sort of conservative and procedural organization. So even the sandbox here in the UK sits supplemental and almost ancillary to the main policy team. So, we've got to collectively help get our, CAAs and our NAAs of the world into a better place where they can understand and incorporate the learnings from those sandbox type environments back into main policy. And I think that's when we'll truly start to see some exciting stuff happening. I think the second point I just want to kind of come in on there as well is I think it's really key to ensure that when we're talking about innovation, that we're doing it in the field, that we're out there learning, that we've got places and areas that are safe for us to do that in, because that's truly where you encounter the real life issues, the real life challenges, whether they're technical. How do we have two different manufacturers or two different UTMs operating in the same geography, whether that's kind of procedural or mixtures of all of those things. It's only at the front line do you really accelerate and uncover those things. So that's what I would certainly counsel. I think we need to see a bit more of, and a bit more appetite from the industry and from regulators around the world to embrace.
Fantastic responses from both of you. Now, the last webinar we had was focused around standards, and we got some fantastic traction with that webinar. Again, if you haven't seen it, it is available on the website, and it's also available on the YouTube channel. But at the moment, BVLOS and those type of activities are currently happening without defined standards. What are your thoughts, Edward, first of all, around that? Are standards a requirement to enable BVLOS, considering we already have activities today happening around that?
I think that's certainly, I think, what a lot of people would prefer. And I think that's naturally what we will progress to. I think as soon as you start seeing, let's say the industry, let's take the examples of some of the industry players today. You've had linear flights. Today we're adopting BVLOS flying for other applications, whether it's behind buildings. For anybody who wants more information around that, you can take a look at the government Pathfinder program. In there, there's specific scenarios that the Pathfinders are looking for to resolve. And these, I think, as the industry develops and we become better at planning missions and flying missions with everything in consideration, the industry will naturally evolve with specific operational use cases, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. There's specific ways of flying that are preferred by the industry, but also preferred by the regulator. And as we sort of mature as an industry, all of this will become more and more, I think, clear. And then you will be left with specific flight categories around BVLOS. Understanding what those standard scenarios look like is I think, the next step, right? Already people are doing BVLOS flying in controlled airspace. And I guess the objective is to do this in uncontrolled airspace, but you can get a lot of information from the existing work that we've done today. As we mature, these standard scenarios are going to become much more clear. And depending on what airspace you are in, do you need specific equipage? All of that, I think, will become clearer. I think it's basically a limitation on whether or not you prescribe to the industry what to start trying out, or you leave it to the industry entirely to figure it out on its own. That's the complexities that I think we're at. I think we're figuring it out now. Did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Richard, your thoughts on standards you gave last week in the context of BVLOS and the current operations? They're already happening. Without the standards being defined, do you think, like as Edward was saying, it's only through demonstrating and trialing these that we can even begin to define them?
Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, right, demonstrations and trials and challenges and tests will yield gaps, and where there are gaps, you can sometimes benefit from standards. Equally, those types of activities will also yield patterns, and patterns can lead to standards. But I like the approach, and I think the approach is a sensible one, when those standards and those gaps are being met with proposed standards based on actual results, actual challenges in the field. I think it's very difficult to come up with a great standard in a vacuum, or to come up with a great standard without having significant industry buy-in and a significant play area effectively to test those out, to tweak them and adapt them. Version 1 of any standard is always terrible. So I think we just have to bear in mind that, we have to get over that first hurdle, and the sooner we can do that, the sooner we can learn all of the things that are inappropriate about those standards, fix them and adapt them and release version 1.1 and continue to iterate.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm conscious we have a stream of questions coming through, which is fantastic. It's great to see the engagement. We're currently just collating all of those, and we will come to those questions towards the end of the presentation. So please do stay with us. We will get around to some of these questions. There's some great ones I can see coming in. The next kind of point I want to put to you both is, how do we then go about enabling BVLOS in the current format that we have? Richard, from your perspective, in the UTM seat, how can the technology that we're developing, be one of the key enablers for beyond visual line of sight?
Cool. Yeah. So let's take a step back and just remind ourselves that today, airspace as a concept is actually pretty complicated. I mean, the management of it is fairly fractured on a global perspective, but it's also very highly procedural and very collaborative. But common systems, integrated networks, etc., those kind of concepts are very, very difficult to come by in the quote-unquote traditional ATM systems that we find. Now, both the technical side and the procedural side today aren't naturally compatible with achieving unsupervised BVLOS or automated flight at scale, especially when we factor in the kind of scale that would be unlocked, and should we be able to deploy some kind of system which enables this to occur. So we also have other aspects and other constraints in the airspace. We have controlled airspace, which I'm sure lots of folks in the webinar are familiar with, spatial areas above our heads that have a regulatory set of constraints associated with them. So broadly speaking, no-fly zones or zones you can only enter with permission, etc. Then we have multiple geographies with different policies. And then we have multiple stakeholders sometimes that are required to be involved in, for example, deciding whether or not it is okay for you to fly a drone in that location, or it is okay for you to transit that airspace. And that's just today, right? I mean, we also have to think about the future. So how might the task of airspace design need to change? And who are the stakeholders that might need all of that data? Will airspace management ever be devolved, brackets, at some level, just to call that out? I think that's important. I'm not suggesting that we just have, completely devolved airspace management, but could that be devolved down to organizations, for example, who manage critical infrastructure like railways and highways or large estates? And if that is the case, and we can see that happening at some point in the future, then those folks are also going to need to publish aeronautical information. And that is a very fundamental concept in the whole aviation industry today. We have agreed cycles for the publication of aeronautical data. So if we took just this one example and said, well, something like the aeronautical information circulars, something fundamental like that is likely to become very challenging as the years roll on. So we have to see systems and processes coming online that can serve really as a kind of robust foundation for all of that stuff. And that's just one really fundamental challenge. And I think that's just one of the goals that a UTM has. But a UTM really should be almost that transparent lubricant, effectively, that exists between all the folks who manage the airspace, all of the folks who have a stake in the control of that airspace, those who enforce access to it, etc., as well as those who want to use it and for various different purposes, recreationally, commercially, etc., should be an enabling force. So I think once we start to address those things, then we can start enabling true automated BVLOS at scale.
Ed, same question to you. How can you see the tool sets provided by UTM and connectivity, for example, being the enabler for BVLOS? What are your aspects from that? How can we drive that forward?
Sure, this is a good question, and it's very central to the ambitions of Herotec 8. So for those, and I should have maybe described this a little bit earlier on, Herotec 8 builds drone-in-a-box solutions, and the mission. So, as a drone-in-a-box provider, the technology is there to allow you to automatically deploy your drone, fly it, recover it, and then recharge or swap its batteries, and then do sort of residual inspection and maintenance on it. And our vision is to take that box and put it anywhere in the world with an internet connection. And from the other part of the planet, let's say, you should still be able to dial in and control the system. There's a whole host of questions to how we get to that end vision. But as you can probably tell, BVLOS is central to this concept. And I don't think that that vision is specific to us. It's specific to the vast majority of drone manufacturers in the world. The vision of the drone system is to not have a pilot there to begin with. We're in this place now with pilots, but we will get away from pilots. We will begin to automate through these things. So BVLOS is very central to Herotec 8. And I think very clearly, different areas have different environments. You need to be able to understand a whole host of information about where the system is operating in. And from our perspective, UTM solves a lot of that as a concept. So if you understand airspace information, if you understand other airspace activity, you can begin to automate the procedures to deal with them. All of these different conflicts in the airspace, you can deal with them. We also need more information, right? We need weather information, we need ground-based information. All of this together will allow us as a company to deploy these things really in the vast majority of scenarios. So BVLOS is key, and UTM we think is a very central piece to it. Connectivity is another good example. I know there's a whole host of questions around Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G, 5G connectivity that is going to really push this stuff, and I think it will, but it is not. I don't think we are at a point where connectivity is the killer of this tech. I think currently the main obstacle that we have is around getting approvals to fly beyond visual line of sight, and leveraging the capabilities of UTM are really the key for that, I think.
Cool. Maybe I'll just top and tail that, Edward, there as well by saying, completely agree with the data aspect is such a fundamental concept. And actually, the more of this that we generate, the more UTM has to do in order to make sure people get the right data at the right time. So even something as simple as the pre-flight planning phase, getting access to the right information, the relevant information at the right time as well, is going to become much, much harder as operations become much more integrated and there are more of them. So again, that feedback that is finding the right people at the right time and connecting these stakeholders together is going to be so key in getting automated BVLOS off the ground. Okay,
so how about this then? So we're talking about these automated solutions. Who will be the responsible operator of that automated solution? Where does that responsibility sit? Does it sit with Ed as the distributor? Does it sit with the end operator that's deployed it for a security purpose and someone's just pressing a button just to launch it? Or does it sit with the UTM service provider who's doing the deconfliction services? I'll throw that one at Richard.
Oh, nice. That's an easy one to open with. The responsibility question, I love it. I think it's going to be quite a complex answer, right? Because again, as a UTM, we operate globally and there are different regulatory practices and enforcement practices in place. But the general principle that the pilot in command is the responsible party, I think is something that we hold very dear to our hearts. So we're very clear that if we are going to be involved somehow in the management or the execution of a flight, then the parts that we are responsible for, we absolutely have to do a couple of things really well. And the first thing is, I think we have to explain the capabilities and the limitations of the service that's being used. So for example, if we're building a deconfliction engine, it should be clear what it can do and what it can't do. And it should also be clear what are the expected outcomes of that deconfliction engine. It shouldn't be something, which we get a lot of the time is, can you guys use artificial intelligence in your deconfliction engine? We kind of said, well, yeah, we could, but do we really want an emergent system with a non-deterministic series of outcomes? It's very difficult to test for and provide assurance around. So that's one example. And I think the second example is we have to back that with with a legal framework that allows and tracks properly, and again, this is where the UTM will help with this independent auditing, when an instruction is given and how that instruction is carried out, and who is the party responsible for carrying that out. So, for example, Altitude Angel's view of deconfliction is to supplement onboard systems and onboard autopilot flight control systems effectively, a little bit like a co-pilot in many respects. So, for example, rather than taking direct command and control of the flight, nudging the flight with regular information about changes it might need to make to its flight path in order to avoid an upcoming conflict. So that approach is minimally invasive. It doesn't require the UTM to actually have an interface on board the vehicle. It doesn't require the UTM to actually speak a specific, proprietary drone control protocol. And it does allow the UTM to standardize a set of messages that are common and ubiquitous to everyone, that you should get the same behaviors from. So, there are lots of different angles here that need to be explored, but that responsibility one is absolutely not a topic that we want to shy away from in any way. And I think that's going to be the biggest, or one of the biggest regulatory challenges, is what happens when there is no human in the loop. What is the commercial burden, and who is that with, and how is that going to be enforced, etc., etc. So there are lots and lots of questions, and actually we do a lot of work with lots of really smart folks in the legal space to help us prepare for some of the challenges that are on the horizon. And we've got to start addressing those today, because the technologies that we're bringing online over the next 18, 24 months, they're being built today. So we've got to build them in a way that allows us to have them inspected, to have them tested, and potentially have them subject to a regulation or procedure or policy which is not even present today. So all of that adds a burden of responsibility that the UTM has to take and should take. And I'm looking forward to meeting that challenge so that we can help open automated BVLOS to folks like Herotec 8 and the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's a valid point, actually, Richard. I think it was in the EASA opinion, it was the first time in black and white that they'd actually spoke about the application of certification for UTM and how that might develop in the future. So, yeah, it's definitely a hot topic around that. I mean, Ed, for you and your customer base, where do they sit in the responsibility factor? I mean, because obviously you're providing a drone-in-a-box solution. Do they accept the responsibility for the operation as it stands? Because that must be a question they raise.
Thanks for the easy question. So I think probably something that you can bear in mind. We still have a mindset today, and in the UK we have to operate within the BVLOS constraints. So we today treat it as though it's a conventional system, let's say. I guess in that responsibility context. But as we progress, you see this question pop up in the vast majority of emergent industries. So whether it's a self-driving car, I think you've probably all seen the dude in the car in a Tesla with an autopilot on, and he's sort of napping in traffic. Who's liable? Tesla say it's the operator. He's supposed to be there and ready to take control. So at that sort of low end, closer to the operation side of things, we still feel that is because of the way the regulations and let's say the standard way in which we operate drones today, that's what we're coupled to. But we expect this to slowly change. Obviously, the more automation you put into the system, the more you remove from the person from the owner, from the client, let's say. We expect to begin to bear more of that responsibility, which is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It means that customers can adopt the technology with ease, and I think when you see this happen, whether you're covering insurance or just assuming responsibility for very specific things like the flight operation, deconfliction, you will see the amount, I guess, with which we adopt this kind of technology skyrocket. I do believe that, because there's an association of de-risking that adoption. So whilst we're not there yet today in our nascent stage, you know, we haven't been around for very long. We think that that's the approach we have because of the legacy systems that we are working with.
Okay. No, fantastic answers from you both. Now, in the UK, manned aviation is not predicted until around 2024 that manned aviation might have to adopt electronic conspicuity devices in controlled airspace. And this is still being talked through with the regulator, ongoing workshops, but controlled airspace only accounts for about 6% of the airspace in the UK, leaving 94%, that is going to require some type of deconfliction with uncooperative traffic. How do we handle that?
I'll just jump in there and say, Dave, you're right there, but you have to remember that stat was controlled airspace that extends down to the ground. So there's a lot of controlled airspace over our tiny island here in the UK, but the bits that really affect drone operations are when that controlled airspace boundary comes down to the ground. So I think the question on conspicuity always comes up, and I think it's a fantastic one to open with, and then I'll turn over to Ed as well as a vehicle manufacturer to gather his thoughts on this as well. But I think there are a couple of things that are a major problem here, right? We have one sky and we have lots of things that move through it, and not all of those things are actually treated equally, and some of that is for very good reason. So for example, we have military aircraft that fly around, and if they're on operation, they're absolutely not going to want to be conspicuous. It's rather against the point of that operation. We also have general aviation, and general aviation has and does enjoy lots of privileges, and it's been able to enjoy that privilege because there are other people on board aircraft that are also in the airspace that can take that responsibility, and as we start to remove those people, that becomes much harder. But even if we just added 20, 30, 40% more manned aviation, this would become much harder manually to achieve anyway under visual line of sight conditions. So we do need better systems, and there are better technologies today that could solve this problem. But I think it's insufficient alone to rely on people in the airspace exclusively to do, quote unquote, the required thing, because there are always going to be arguments around people who, through accident or through some kind of nefarious behavior, turn those things off or don't equip them in the first place. So, we have to take a risk-based approach to this and work out, where do we care most about detection? And then we deploy sensors in that area that allow us to verify what we're being told as a UTM. So, for example, what we're able to detect based on what people are transmitting to us and what we're receiving on various surveillance systems. And then being able to corroborate what we see, and then combining all of this into the services that the UTM delivers. So conspicuity is going to be a key factor, but let's not wait until 2024, for example, for that problem to be solved, because by the time we've solved it, there will now be another problem. We will have more air traffic, we will have new technologies, and we'll have additional challenges and additional constraints. So we can't keep letting these constraints tail the curve of demand that we're seeing. I think we've got a wonderful opportunity to get out here, to use software, to use sensors that are readily available, and to adopt it. And I do see in aviation sometimes a bit of a reticence to adopt newer technologies. But what I don't often see is a lot of pilots, for example, reticent to go and update to the latest iPhone. When this technology is available and we want it, we go get it and we spend thousands on it. When this technology, however, feels more like a burden, we don't. So this is the other point I just wanted to get out there and throw out for the audience's consideration, is that this shouldn't just be about adding trackers to everything. The trackers actually have to solve a purpose, and people have to buy into that purpose. And if that's going to enhance safety, give new freedoms, make it more ubiquitous for folks to get access to the air, then that's surely got to be a benefit that we all agree is worth going after. So I didn't anticipate answering that question in such a lengthy way, but maybe I'll stop now and hand over to Ed.
Yeah, sure. So we've experimented quite a bit. Obviously, we fly, we still supervise everything. It's just where we are at. But we experiment simply with whether it's ADS-B or other mechanisms to read air traffic or have an idea that we're reading air traffic, integrations with UTM services. And when you have this information at your disposal, you have a better way of, I guess it informs your decision making. So you know what you can and can't do, but you also know what you should and shouldn't do. And building that into our solution, I think is going to be the next step. Making sure that the information that we are fed or our systems are fed, they can behave accordingly. And to be honest, when we have that, a lot of that data already exists. Understanding what procedures are supposed to be put in place, that comes hand in hand with electronic conspicuity. There's limited amount of information that we have. There's no sort of specific guideline that we sort of follow. We implement very quick fail safes. If anything happens, you bring the plane down in a safe manner. That's the immediate reaction that we have. But as the complexities grow, as more aircraft fly and more data is fed into it, we can begin, hopefully, to employ intelligent mechanisms, whether it's being fed deconfliction information, whether it's being fed simply external data from other services around that perhaps are embedded within the wider UTM architecture. All of this is going to play a fundamental part to how our vehicles behave when they're operating, particularly when they're operating in an unsupervised manner. That's the objective.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, it's been great hearing from you both around these topics, but what I'd like to do now is go to the list of questions that I've had coming through whilst we've been talking. One of the questions we've had come through from the audience is, will UTM need an equivalent of the Eurocontrol air traffic flow management unit for flight slot allocation? Is that something we foresee happening in the future? Richard, you are muted.
I am. I've got the loudest keyboard in the world, so I've got in the habit of making sure I mute. I think that's it's a natural thing to assume might be a requirement, and actually the function of a UTM, particularly at a national level, is to help provide some of that context. But this notion of slots and routes is perhaps a little bit of an antiquated methodology that leads to a much more inefficient use of the airspace, particularly at high volume, particularly at low altitude. So, we should start to think more about something in aviation is kind of user preferred routes, or the route that you would like to fly and the time you would like to fly it becoming unavailable to others, seems like a fairer concept, right? It's similar to how your cars work today. You get in your car and you drive. You don't reserve a slot. You don't have flow management aspects to deal with there. Somehow all of us automated individuals operating on the highway can work that out, and the UTM is going to have to help with that. So I think the last thing to just think about there is, if we do build that kind of construct in, then the question really back to those thinking about that is, would that drive potentially some bad behaviors? Would that favor organizations who have more money than others? Would they buy the best routes? Would they buy the best slots? Would they buy the best takeoff times? That's a very commercial aviation construct that perhaps isn't going to be the best use of the airspace here going forwards. I'm not suggesting that those economic factors can't be taken into account through different systems, but I do think we ought to be cautious about moving towards those types of network management scenarios. It's a great question.
Ed, do you have anything on that?
So I guess from our perspective, we're sort of, without being rude, we're sort of indifferent. Whatever, we will work with the frameworks that are proposed to us as a system, let's say, manufacturer. I think it is, well, we're beholden to whatever requirements are pushed our way, whether it's by the regulators or whether it's by the service providers. I don't think that's not really a question that we can answer. We're simply beholden to requirements from the government, let's say.
Okay, no, fantastic. So Another question we've had come through, which is a really interesting one, having worked with, done some work alongside the MAA and the CAA. The question is focused around this. The discussion seems naturally centered around commercial applications. How do you see UTM in the context of BVLOS integrating into the military dimension, UK or internationally? I mean, given that they operate in different regulatory frameworks, what are the challenges in commonality do we see, you know, in that?
Shall I jump in with that? Or,
yeah, go.
Managed to get myself off mute in time as well. So setting aside, I think, the policy-based aspects of how that integrated airspace system might be managed from a regulatory perspective, let's put this in the context of where it started. You know, how is this going to factor into a UTM enabling BVLOS? So I think, you know, generally there is a bit of a misunderstanding that in seeing or detecting or being informed about military air traffic movements, that the UTM is somehow going to disseminate that information into a moving map or onto a map for, you know, like FlightAware or Plane Finder or something like that. That's absolutely not the case. And certainly in the surveillance technologies that we've built into our UTM, we have the ability to distinguish classifications of aircraft. And that means very simply that it's possible for the UTM to instruct a deconfliction maneuver or a deconfliction action without yielding why it's doing that or the identity of the aircraft that it is maneuvering to avoid. So I think it's entirely possible to have an integrated system, but it's worth, you know, calling out. Certainly on a global perspective, not every country has a close commercial aviation management with its military aviation. So there is in some cases, there's two organizations to contend with, and it's going to require the cooperation of both. However, military and commercial aviation have a long history of coexisting quite well. And of course, there are exceptions, active deployments and operational situations that change in a moment's notice. But the civilian air traffic system is very, very good generally at responding to those things when they come up. And a UTM is going to have to do the same. So I don't see these being blockers. I see them as additional steps that need to be factored in. And sure, there are going to be technical constraints around doing that. Perhaps one of the biggest constraints, however, is trust. You know, the military will have to trust the UTM technology. And notice there I said the UTM technology and not necessarily the UTM company, because it might not be the company that makes the technology that is running the service that the country is using to provide its centralized deconfliction. So, you know, there are lots of angles and facets to that I think, you know, we could probably spend another hour or two on, but hopefully that's a reasonable starting point for the question. Dave, you're on mute now as the host.
I am on. Edward, I guess, do you have any, you know, with your drone in the box solution, you know, do you see there being any challenges, you know, with the UTM sitting with it, whether it's with the MAA or the CAA? Is that where your markets might be focusing? Can you see the challenges there, as Richard mentioned?
I think we are, and again, I'll be very frank about this. Herotec 8, it's still exploring what this all means and how we are expected to bring the solution to market. I don't distinguish really between, if it was, for example, MAA telling the system to do something, I'm sure the system is going to respond in the appropriate manner. Whether it's a civilian application or a military application, if there's a prioritization, we are dependent on external services to dictate how the vehicle or the system is supposed to perform. So whether it's, you know, if we are operating in Europe and the service that we are connected to requires us to behave in a specific way, we will do that. If there are specific areas where we are required not to encroach, then we will also do that. So I don't see that as a major challenge for us moving forward, but I'm very cognizant that I may also not have a full picture in my head as we progress.
Okay, I'm conscious of time. We've got about 10 minutes left, so we'll try and get through as many of the remaining questions as we can, and we'll try and keep the answers short and sweet so we can progress through some of these. So, Richard, I think this one's aimed at you. Will standards not be driven by the loudest UTM at the table? We're aware that a lot of UTMs within the industry try and propose standards. Your thoughts?
Given we have very short amount of time left, I think it's worth just acknowledging there's nothing wrong with a UTM proposing a standard. I think if the standard is the product, as we said before, or the standard drives a sale, then that's a different aspect. The standard should be solving a specific goal or a specific problem. And sometimes those goals and problems are dictated by the loudest or the UTM or the company with the deepest pockets. But the internet has a pretty good history of resisting that kind of challenge. Standards consortiums like W3C, for example, welcome global collaboration, global input. And as I said in last week's, the previous webinar rather, we actually have to cooperate as an industry, come up with the problems that we face as an industry and drive those through as an industry, not as a series of industry bodies who themselves exist only really to propose and govern standards. It should be the industry driving that request to those standards bodies for assistance in formalizing those.
Okay. And then the next question then that we've had come through is, do you have any expectation or requirements for counter UAV technology to support BVLOS and to have that deployed commercially? I'll put that to both of you. One to Richard, I guess, from the surveillance aspect, and also to Ed, the ability to see, uncooperative traffic where you might be operating an automated solution. So Richard, if you want to answer first.
Yeah, and I think actually it's probably some great interplay between Edward and us here, right? Because there are two different levels to this. Ed's building these awesome automated solutions that are deployed in a box. They're designed to be robust. They're designed to go out in the field where there aren't people around to fly them. And there's only going to be so much information that can be provided to Herotec 8 in that scenario from the network, from the UTM. And we're going to go and get that data from sensors in the area, other local systems, people sending that telemetry to us proactively, doing everything we can to get that network effect. But probably when it comes to the actual operation, there's still going to be a requirement for some mystical technology as yet undeveloped that we might be talking about in the next couple of months, tantalizingly, that Ed and other companies can deploy into those solutions that give them that ground up ubiquitous surveillance to plug that gap. And it's that plugging of that gap, I think, that's going to be a real enabler. So yeah, I mean, uncooperative traffic needs to be detected, needs to be tracked, and it's going to take both the UTM and the vehicle manufacturers and solutions integrators to come together, I think, to solve those. What are your thoughts on that, Ed?
So it's a really tough question. We bring a lot of, we try to bring in and feed our system with as much data as possible to make, to provide the pilot, to provide the operator with a meaningful way to make a decision. I think that for counter-UAS systems, integrating counter-UAS systems, for example, into our box. So if you imagine a box that might be surrounded by some of this kind of technology in the future, I think that potentially works. It of course has a cost implication to that. So like everything else, something to be cognizant of, particularly with an expectation to accelerate the industry. You want costs to really come down a little bit as opposed to go up. But you're right, improving the surveillance, improving the situational awareness picture is super important. And getting that, picking up on someone who is perhaps uncooperative is very, very important. If our vision is to have unsupervised flights, right? So you want to stick something on a small island somewhere, in the middle of nowhere. It's very, very difficult to get to. And the drone goes down because someone else has decided to, fly and intervene there. It's very difficult to get someone out there to go and fix it. And let's say there's a cost associated to that. So getting a better picture of that environment is important. But I wonder how clear that picture can be in the future. I think that there's a lot of good tech. I know D-Drone is one example of company that comes up on the radar a lot. And there are lots of others, but I wonder how resilient, how perfect that picture can be. And I would imagine you guys have a lot of answers here, having dealt with this kind of technology, I assume.
Yeah, and I would love to be able to go into all of this, but I'm conscious that I think we've got like 4 minutes left. I want to make sure we give ample space to get through as many of these questions as we can and hand back to David, our trusty chaperone. But it just means we'll have to do another webinar and talk about it then.
So the next question I want to propose to you, and it will probably be the last question before we wrap up, and I'm going to put this to Ed first, is do you think mobile network operators add value to UTM? And if so, how and where do you think the most value would be delivered? Because I guess from your perspective, you will not only be using it to receive data and to communicate to a UTM, but also to service and manage the box itself.
It's a big piece there. So I think that I guess you're referring to telecoms, telecom networks, and so on, right? I think they probably have a very major role to play. If we envisage that we will be communicating, over the internet with super low latency, then there is certainly a need for it, and that's why we have a lot of research in this space around 5G technology and other technologies that may supplant it. But there's a good need to reduce latency. Nobody wants to. I'm sure many of the people in the call will have seen, the 1 or 2 second delay on Zoom that might happen once in a while, and that alone is frustrating. When you have a safety critical system operating, how many milliseconds does it take to throw everything out of play? So I think that there's a responsibility for the industry to develop these kinds of technologies and then integrate them. The second part of your question was around the maintenance. Is that correct, Dave?
To provide connectivity to actually deploy the drone itself, because as you mentioned,
right,
you'll be probably
right.
deploying these in remote locations. How do you access that?
Right. Well, I guess it's the same question. It's providing coverage so we can connect to the systems. Ultimately, we envisage these systems. We think of them as IoT devices as we progress, and the central piece here around IoT devices is that connectivity. I guess these kinds of companies, they absolutely have a goal, is to enable the integration of as many systems of these as possible.
Excellent. Richard, your final thoughts on that last question. I'm conscious we've got a few more minutes left. How would you respond to the telco position within the UTM space?
I'll definitely try and keep it brief. And I think I say, connectivity is obviously the place that we all generally head. But, mobile networks have spent many, many years, decades, in fact, doing many amazing things, including deploying infrastructure. So they have, coverage all over the place. And they've got these fantastic networks that track subscribers, they track where they are, they track where they move. 5G developments mean that we're able to use off-board positioning information in creative ways at the network level as well as at the vehicle level. So that, the networks can play an enormous part in UTM going forwards. And that's before we start to think about the role of a network in providing UTM services themselves. That is certainly an appetizing and interesting area to a lot of telcos that we speak to. So I think over time, we're going to see lots of movement in that area and lots of interesting services coming online.
Excellent. What a fantastic discussion we've had today, and I hope our viewers have enjoyed the discussion. I think we've covered BVLOS and the role of UTM fairly comprehensively, and how they align. So I'm going to bring the webinar to a close. So if I could ask you both to sum up your final thoughts. If our viewers were to go away with one piece of information today, what would that be? Edward, I'll go to you first.
From Herotec 8's standpoint, or at least my personal standpoint, I think that we're in a position as an industry and even as a country, we're using drones more and more. Drone adoption is going up, and the drone opportunities are really there. And I think even COVID-19, right? It's put or the utility of drone technology and drone operations is becoming more and more clear. And I think with opportunities like Future Flight and with the sandbox, maybe we have an opportunity to really hopefully leapfrog. leapfrog maybe the rest of the industry and take a leadership role. If we don't have one already, you know, this is the time to really to get it. I think that UTM is going to enable a lot of things for us, and it will change the way in which we use drones in the future. I think it's the key thing that is necessary to really deploy our solutions at scale in a futuristic way that we've envisaged. I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, likewise. And Richard, to you, your closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely echo that. It's a great wrap up. You know, certainly, I think just to recount, you know, the goal we're all working towards here is an integrated, unified airspace. And to achieve this, we've got, you know, several changes that are required. Changes that involve various stakeholders to support and implement the necessary technologies and the procedural changes for sure. But all of that will ultimately become the foundation for efficient and equitable use of the sky in the future. And for us, you know, automated BVLOS, or that unsupervised BVLOS, is absolutely a key enabler in, you know, unleashing that potential for drones to transform lives, revolutionize business. And it's a UTM's goal to provide the necessary technologies and the capabilities to do that on a consistent and on a unified platform. And, you know, that's the mission that we're on, and that's what we're looking forward to enabling over the next few months and coming years. And just before we do close, I just want to take this time as CEO of AA to thank Edward for coming on as our first ever invited external guest. So, and thanks very much, Edward. Really appreciate that.
Thanks very much. It's good to be here.
Excellent. And thank you also to those that have joined us today on the webinar. If you'd like to learn more about our services which can support your BVLOS aspirations, such as our surveillance APIs or conflict resolution service, then head over to the Altitude Angel website, or feel free to get in touch via the usual channels. On behalf of Richard, Edward and I'd like to thank you all for joining. We hope you found the last hour interesting and insightful. We'll be back again in September with another webinar. Please, if there are any topics or subjects you'd like to hear us discuss and debate, then please let us know. If you want to be a guest, again, also please get in touch and come on and have that discussion. So now I'd like to thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now. Thank you.
Ed, before everyone disappears, where can they find more information out about Herotec 8?
So you can go to www.herotec8.com or go to our LinkedIn page.
Awesome. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.